Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy Wednesday if you're on the other side of the world. Hope you all had a good week. Today, I'm going to talk about a variety of things. One pretty interesting question is, how do I come up with the name of boards? How do I come up with board models names? Some of the names are kind of logical, like the Moby fish. It's a big fish. Other names are just ridiculous. We had a board 15, 20 years ago that it was named in honor of Bob Bocci, who owned Diamond Glassing and who glassed my boards forever, even back in the G&S days. He was a sander, actually, but Bob owned the glass shop, and Bob was a man of stature. And so we came up with this a groveler, I don't know, 20 years ago, and it was wider and it was fuller. Call it Bob. So some of the names are ridiculous, and a lot of times I let the team at the factory come up with the names. Clint used to come up with his own names. I mean, he got into wakeboarding, or wake surfing when he was in high school with a friend. So he got a pretty good jump on it. But he came up with the name of one of his models is Snaggletooth. Another one is Urchin. The SD, which is popular, is kind of Clint's name. That board was taken off of Stab in the Dark a few years ago with, I think I've told the story many times, but with Dane Reynolds. And I didn't know, wasn't sure. It was, he kind of liked it. He didn't hate it, which was cool, because if Dane doesn't hate your stuff, that means it's pretty good. He's pretty open about it. But Clint came up with that. He just abbreviated the name, really. We live in San Diego, so we took the Padres SD. If you want to know, you can hit me up with questions if you want to know how I came up with other names. But the naming the board is interesting because there's so many board builders out there in the world, and they all, some of them, I mean, a lot of their names are ridiculous too. Some people, are kind of the groove masters, and they have the Zen or the Mystic, or one of our most popular boards of all time was the Piranha, and I'm kind of semi-aware of what maybe the main board builders are building out there. But this guy, he's a longtime friend, and he's a respected board builder, and he called me one day and he says, I've got a board called the Piranha. And I go, dude, I'm so sorry. I honestly didn't know. It's a great name. But we'd already launched it and did the media online. I don't even think it was really a factor. We had a website. I think we were one of the first surf brands to have a website. That was thanks to a skate company here in San Diego. But yeah, it's if you have any specific questions about a name, hit me up.
The evolution of Flea's toe board.
That's a good question. Flea, I changed marketing directors, I don't know, back in the day in the late 90s. PT had been a marketing director for a long time, and then we had another one who was pretty darn good with people and certain things, but he didn't really get the fine nuances of the art or sport, or whatever you want to call surfing. And so we hired this guy named Mike Schmuller, who came from another smaller brand Brandon had been around for a couple of years, but was struggling. So we hired Mike, and the first thing he insisted that we do is hire Flea. And Flea was a great guy. He was a good big wave surfer, still is. And that was about the time when people were starting the first. I could be off of my dates a little bit, but people were starting to experiment with tow boards. And the first ones, I got a picture. I'll maybe try and put it up on my Instagram of the first tow board we made, Flea. I think it was the first one, and it was 7.4, and it was 17.25 inches wide. It was narrow. He had the right thinking on the narrowness, but they're still thinking in terms of paddling in, or you need more length to handle the size. But over the course of the next year or two, the boards kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And nowadays, I still make a handful of tow boards, but most of them are under 6 feet long. They're 5'7" to 5'9", and they're usually pretty much just under 17 inches wide and just over 2 inches thick. And they have a fairly low rocker, but that's because you're riding a big wave and the curves are expanded. So they've got, unlike big paddle-in boards that are long and they have to be wider to maintain template curve, those big boards actually have to have a convex bottom. I mean, even a little bit of V. Even a little bit of V in the center of the board, but I'd say medium to medium plus deep V in the sweet zone. Whereas the tow boards are concave, pretty much. Maybe not the front foot or two, but in the entry they're concave, and they're concave through the middle, and they're concave through the sweet spot. But it's not a deep concave. To me, a shallow concave is like 0.1, which is slightly less than an eighth of an inch. A medium deep V is something in the high teens, which is a little bit over an eighth. And then a deep V is something in the 1/4 inch plus, and that works concave or V. But it's the lateral break on the bottom. So yeah, a deep V or deep concave. I've got a few, not so many deep V models, but I've got a handful of deep concave models, like the SD is one that's about 0.28. So the tow boards, the tow boards these days are, I don't know, I said 5'7" to 5'9", maybe anywhere from 5'6" to 5'10", but they're usually under 17 inches wide, usually just over 2, and they have a full-length concave that I sometimes split in the sweet zone, just to help create some lateral freedom. But you get the lateral freedom from the lack of width. So, that's. I mean, well, I had other big wave riders too when we had Flea, but Flea was recognized as the hell man on our team. Flea, I don't know if you're watching or listening, but I'm proud of you, man. You've done a good thing with your life. What else have we got? This is a good one. When calculating board dimensions, is it the measure of the foam and glass? No, it's not. It's the foam. And this brings up a very, very interesting point. There is a variance. The computer shaping machine is not perfect. It has a variance, I believe, of 3 to maybe almost 3/10 of a liter to maybe 4/10 plus of a liter on the actual cut. So, if you think you're getting a board at 30.5 liters, it actually may come off the machine a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner. It's usually pretty good on width, but when you finish sand the board, that's really because you take off. The depth of the ridges is different from machine to machine and setting to setting. I mean, if you want to spend an hour with your board on the machine, you can take it off the machine and you kind of don't even need to sand it because it's so. You still see the ridges, but they're so fine that you could probably glass it. It would probably be right unreal. So yeah, you lose. You lose a bit of the machine gives you the volume when it comes off the machine, but it doesn't calculate how much foam you take off. So you lose anywhere up from, once again, about 3/10 to maybe even half a liter. And then the glassing adds anywhere from, I'm trying to remember, it's like, it adds 3 to 5/100ths of an inch each side, so maybe a 1/16 of an inch total. And I know I dwell on volume every Tuesday when I come on here, but I had a guy. He's actually a distributor. I made him a little hatchet, and he's always fucking around with the tail temp. It's like the hatchet is designed to have a wide swallowtail, or a wide-ish swallowtail, and he asked for it to be a round pin, and I went, oh God, okay. And specifically 20.12 inches and 2.14. Flat deck board, they need to be thinner, like about a 1/4 inch thinner, maybe not quite that much. And I set him the program right, tits on the money, and I get an email from him back. He's to the east. I get an email back from him the next day. He goes, we need to take it up to 2.16. So I did it. I did it. And, okay, that's 2/100ths of an inch. I have, in the past I used to hand shape. Every once in a while I have a difficult team writer that goes, the board's good, but, they'd want to change it 1/8 of an inch or, even 3/8 of an inch sometimes. And not so much thickness because you can feel that, but the width or whatever. This one guy I had to finally start writing the numbers that he was giving me on the stringer, but I was shaping different numbers, and he goes, "All the boards are killer, man. You've really come a long ways." But so back to the original question, calculating the board dimensions. The width isn't really affected, but the glassing adds more than this distributor was asking me to change the board. So I emailed him back. I go, well, here you go. It's 2.16 thick. And by the way, 2/100ths of an inch, really? And I said, the volume change on this is 0.27. I go, there's no one on the planet that can fill 1/4 of a liter. That is a fucking, I don't know, it's a small, it's the last couple of gulps of beer or coffee or whatever. And I said, please, from now on, please don't bother me with volume changes of less than half a liter and thickness changes less than 1/8 of an inch. And Your weight varies more than that. If you look at it in terms of percentages of the volume and your personal body weight, your weight, depending on how big you are, fluctuates between 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds a day. So, anyways, I think that's the last I'm talking about volume tonight.
Best board for Encinitas.
The best board for Encinitas, Carlsbad.
Mediocre surf.
I don't know. That's kind of a really focused question. The best board for a particular spot. A lot of boards. There's a lot of boards in our lineup that would work great for you at Carlsbad or Encinitas, mediocre surf. Several of our grovelers, several of our performance hot dog boards, but it all depends on how you want to surf too. That has a big part in it. There's certain waves like Big Rock are kind of more design specific. Big Rock's a short slabby wave, and guys back in the early days used to have a hell of a time riding a spot because in order to get in, they felt like they needed longer, gunnier boards. But the problem is the boards wouldn't fit because it was such a relatively short, open but really round curve to the wave. And as time's gone by, they've realized that they should actually have a shorter board with more tail rocker, maybe not excessive nose rocker, but extra tail rocker, so they can take off and they can pull right in and get barreled and come out. And that's kind of what the slab's about. The Slayer. So now your question about, it's like somebody saying what's the best board possible for Mission Beach or some place in New York or whatever. First of all, I don't know how you surf. I don't know how long you surfed. I don't know what your ability is, and I don't really know how you want to surf. So, if you could give me more detail and more information, I might be able to narrow it down to about 10 different designs or models.
If you could get any shaper to make you a board, who would it be and what?
That's a good question. If I could get any shaper to make me a board, who and what? That's a great question because in the first couple of years I started shaping, I wanted to learn as much as I could from different shapers. I realized that there was no one, I wasn't into, I wasn't like focused on Jerry Lopez's, pipe designs, or I wasn't focused on Skip Fry's flat eggs. All the different designs had merits, and they rode different ways differently. And so I tried a lot of different shapers' boards. Skip made me a few. I tried to get Dick Brewer to make me a board, but he found out I was a shaper and he denied me. But we hooked up about 25 years later, and he made me a couple of beautiful boards. Very cool, humble guy. The first Dick Brewer I ordered, I ended up getting a Sam Hawk, but it was a great board. It was a Trifin, actually. It was 1971, I think, and it was a 610 that was 20 and a quarter wide, with a 13-inch nose and a 14-inch diamond tail, and it had 2 side bites. And I was tripping, but it worked insane. Mike Eaton shaped me some boards. I've had, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 different shapers. Randy Pidd. Randy's a chef these days. But as I would go to this shaper, I wouldn't force them to make me my idea of a board. I'd go to them because I just wanted to try out their style of shaping and their. I had my ideas of what I would ride every day, day to day, but I really wanted to try different shapers' ideas, and so it's been a long time since I've had a shaper shape me a board, but Hoy Reynolds, who's been shaping, I shaped with him back at GNS almost 50 years ago, and he's been shaping with me for most of the brand's life. I think I brought him on year 2 or 3 of the brand, and Hoy is an amazing shaper. He's humble as heck. Yes to everything, and I had him shape me some boards too. After as the GNS, I used to trip on how clean and efficient his shaping was. I say I've got 2 of the better shapers on the planet working for me, Hoy and Rick Hammond. Hoy can shape anything from 4.5 foot to a 12.6 gun or a paddleboard or a sailboard. And Rick pretty much the same. So shout out to 2 of my shapers who've been shaping with me for 30 plus years.
For an intermediate surfer, it needs to be a groveler or hybrid, but he only wants one. Where do they start?
An intermediate surfer that needs a groveler or a hybrid. He only wants to buy one, and where should he start? Well, for groveling usually means waves that aren't that clean, they're not that powerful, and maybe a lot of times they're not that long. So there's been, back in at the end of the longboard era, in the beginning of the shortboard era, people's quivers basically were maybe a couple of boards, everyday wave board, and then maybe a semi-gun, and then if they're serious about big waves, a gun. But now, pro surfers get 10 new boards every stop. One year I made Simon Law. I made Simon Law. He rode for us back in the late 80s, early 90s, and Simon was a great surfer from Australia, and he kind of shined more in bigger waves. He's probably not a good example, but I used to make him a lot of boards, more so than anybody else. But back to your question, a groveler needs to be a little wider, not just in the middle, but in the nose and the tail. It needs to be a little bit flatter, rocker-wise, and they're arguably shorter, 2, 4, 6 inches shorter than your regular everyday board. So you get the planing out of the area, extra area from the extra wide nose and tail, and you get the extra planing from the lower rocker. And the thickness doesn't come into play as much. The volume really doesn't come into play as much as the efficiency of the hull. And a board designed for small, mushy waves, shorter. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches shorter, a little bit wider in the middle, a little bit wider, a bit wider in the nose and tail. Like, I'd say a nose minimum of 14.5 wide, maybe up to 16.5 inches wide, and the tail at least 15 and closer to 16 plus, and a lower rocker. And we have several grovelers on our website that I think would serve you well.
Jay Grenville's been buying a Blackbird for OB San Francisco.
Winter is right around the corner, and I'm getting a lot of inquiries about Blackbirds. I used to, 15, 20 years ago, I had, maybe up to 10 years ago, we had a board called the Traveler, which was a step-up board, but also more of a semi-gun, and it had a lot of manifestations. It had a lot. It looked a lot to the early 90s designs. It had excessive rocker and very narrow noses, and I just took it off of our website a couple of days ago because every once in a while I still get a request for it. And if I'm being true to the Traveler, I mean the 6.6 has almost an inch more nose rocker than the Blackbird, and a touch more tail rocker, but the nose rocker is really something that's changed. And the balance of the board, the balance point was behind center, and the nose was very narrow relative to the tail. But the Blackbird has Slayer 15 years ago, Slayer 2 about 12 years ago, 10 years ago, and the Blackbird about 5 years ago. So it's been an evolution. The Slayer was really, like I mentioned before, is designed to be ridden, 2, 3, 4 inches shorter than your performance short board. The Slayer 2 is kind of the next one up. It's meant to be ridden maybe a couple of inches longer than your hot dog board or your everyday board. And then the Blackbird is kind of a step up from the Slayer 2. They're fairly similar, but I think the Blackbird has been such a huge success that I've built quite a few for San Francisco. I built a lot of them for blacks. It's a good travel board, and I monkey around with the design a slight bit from time to time. Like, maybe a year or two ago, I started getting the nose maybe a touch too relaxed, so I've lifted it again. But the tail rocker's good, the bottom's good, and I really don't see any need to change design much anymore. And it's a very popular board. It's a good choice for a step up.
Could you please talk about which condition is best for Model 8?
The Model 8. What we're getting pretty specific here again. But what condition is best for the Model 8? Well, I'm not being sarcastic, but the better the waves, the better the conditions are for most boards designs. The Model 8 is a good all-around, high performance short board. It has a shallower concave. It's like 0.1 just behind the wide point. That's the deepest it gets, and it's got a little bit slightly flatter deck, slightly fuller rail, a little bit more relaxed nose, but good, decent tail rocker. It's just there's a lot of surfers that are into much deeper concaves. I think the deeper the concave gets, the more nervous the bottom becomes. It's like you get so much lift that it's a little bit trickier to set the rail unless you have a very low volume board. But the board with moderate bottom contours are more predictable, I guess. You can you don't get surprised as much on the way the board reacts, and every board has a different way of reacting when you ride it. But
so why are flat decks? Why are they so responsive underfoot in that case?
Another question about flat decks. The history. Nobody's ever the first to design anything, I don't think. Maybe I'll get into flat decks in a minute, but like my first custom board, my first used board was a Carl Ekstrom asymmetrical I bought in '67, and then very early in '68, I got a twin pin from the Miranda brothers, and at the time that board was, it was right. The end of '67 was kind of the end of the longboard era. I remember the magazines were really coming out once every month, and the time between the first of the year and the second or third issue, kind of April-ish of '68, there were ads in the surf magazines. Some companies were advertising 9.6s gloss and polished, and other companies were advertising 610 V bottoms. And the world was all over the place on design. And so back to the twin fin thing, I think, the Mirandans had... Unfortunately, they got overlooked by history because they're the guys that inspired Steve Liss. But the Mirandans were kind of different guys, brothers from La Jolla, and different guys. But Steve Liss, he took the twin fin idea and shrunk it down into, it was a knee board basically. He was a knee boarder. And it was, his version was very flat rocker, fuller outline, a wider tail, but the Mirandans, I think, should be given the credit for making the transition from a Simmons twin fin, and then Tom Blake. I think in the late 40s, he had a couple of twin fins that he made, and I'm looking at I don't know if this will work. I haven't tried this before, but as you guys can see, these are the top picture is Simmons twin fin from '48. And the other two are more in the early 50s. But you can look up the history of the twin fin. You can look up anything, basically, these days. So the twin fin has been around 70 years, maybe. And it's evolved, and there's still people that have a lot of different interpretations of how to make a twin fin. And one of the big things is the fin placement. The fin template and the fin placement is even more important. And I was fortunate enough to work with Sean Thompson in the late 70s. When I was at Canyon, we actually did a license job with Sean, and we made his boards for 2 or 3 years. And Sean and I became pretty good friends. And when we first started our business relationship, he was riding twin fins. As most of the world, they were riding either single fins, usually in bigger surf, and twin fins in smaller surf. And Sean was is a great guy. He'd get aboard. He'd spend time with me in the shaping room, and we'd talk, and I'd make the changes he'd want me to make. I nailed them, and he'd go try the board. And after a couple of sessions, sometimes after one session, he'd come back to me and goes, "Oh, bro, that board is really good." But so I wanted to call Sean's model the butt board, but he came back to me with constructive criticism, for a couple of years on twin fins, and I think towards the end we were nailing it, with fin position, not only how far up it was from the tail, but how far away they are from the rail, how much toe in and tilt out. And but I see a lot of people still these days having them, in my humble opinion, too close to the rail. I thought the rear of the fin should be about an inch and 3/8, maybe even close to an inch and a half away from the rail, and line up with the back, with the wing. The back of the fin line up with the wing, and the wing placement was pretty crucial too. And I think the boards that Sean and I developed 40 years ago are still quite legit today. And I've made them for some very good surfers. There's some, Josh Kerr got a couple and loved them, and he rode them. He took them to Indo with him one time, and we've got shots of him riding. I forget the name of the ride, but he's standing in a 6 foot, 7 foot barrel, wide open barrel on a twin fin. And they used to have the reputation of, well, they don't really work in hollow surf, or they don't really work in great surf, or they slide too much. But if you have you need slightly bigger fins, you need them farther back, you need them farther in from the rail, and I don't know if there's a board, a shaper, Bill Thrillkill, who he made twin fins way back in the day, and his two fins were, I don't know, they were 3 inches, maybe 4 inches apart, so they're much closer together, way far away from the rail, much closer together. And his fin position, his ideas in a twin never really caught on. But these days I see Australia especially, because they're kind of really focused on mid-length boards right now, and there's guys fooling around with twin fins with the fins very close together, like 3-4 inches apart. And so, yeah, but back to my original point, if a twin fin is designed proper, it'll, I used to watch Mark Richards out at Longyear Cay on, not so much Big Sunset, but he rode them at Sunset. But I remember a couple of days, a solid 8-10 foot Longyear Cay where he was on a longer twin fin, and he was laying it over, and his knees were touching the water, and the twin fin is narrower, it was longer, but it held. It worked. He ripped on them.
Have you ever considered putting a little bit more nose rocker in the smoothie?
Here's somebody who wants to know if I'd consider putting more nose rocker in the smoothie. The stock smoothie has a kind of a relaxed entry, and it's got a pretty decent amount of tail rocker, and for what the board's designed for, it's not really designed as a small wave ripper. It's not really designed as a next one up, but it's designed as a well-rounded cruiser. And yeah, I can add more rocker. If you want to order custom, I can add you all the rocker you want. But yeah, it arguably for some people, they like the design, but yeah, it's a little on the flat side on the entry. But I can do that. I can do that with any design. I can, here I go on volume again. You people are so obsessed with volume, but nobody ever asks anything about rocker, about the area, the width, the proportions, the fins. I already had my spiel about friends don't let friends ride plastic fins, but yeah, nobody. The single by far most focused on design element of a surfboard is volume, and I almost wish we were back in the day before the machines, because people would walk into a shop, surfers with a little bit of experience that knew what would work for them, would walk into a shop, and everybody had kind of the same routine. They'd pull it out of the rack, and they'd look at it, they'd hold it up, and kind of feel the rails, and then if they really knew what they were doing, they'd hold the board with the bottom up and roll it back and forth like this to check the bottom contours. And then the last thing is they put it under their arm for, oh, this feels good. And I guarantee you, I had some boards that were so, Mike Rateau shaped me, he's another shaper. Rest in peace, Mike. But Mike shaped me several boards back in the early days, and one of them was a Swallow Wing, and it was a 610. You know, I'm a big guy. I've always been big, but it was kind of too thin for me. And I wasn't sure I could even. I knew I could ride it, but I didn't think I'd enjoy it because it'd be too much work. But the board absolutely ripped, you know, and. At first, I had a little bit of trouble catching waves, but I eventually my paddle muscles or whatever speed got used to how the extra work that it took. But the thinner board had more flex, more life, and and then I think that was one of the thinnest boards that I had. The basic answer to your question is sure, I can have more nose rocker. Just tell me what you're interested in. I won't let you do. I'll try not to let you do too much nose rocker. But yeah, it could use an extra quarter, 3/8 of an inch, and handle a little bit hollower surf.
Back to Ocean Beach in San Francisco. A bigger guy who's wondering, a Yeti or a Blackbird?
Bigger guy in San Francisco. The Yeti. The Blackbird is the stock board is proportioned for surfers 160 to 190 pounds, but I can make a 8-foot Blackbird. I made plenty of 8-foot Blackbirds that are 22 and a half, and it's kind of it's staying true to the proportions of the board. Proportions being rocker, thickness, flow on the bottom. But the Yeti is a big guy step-up board. And I think big guy is, if you're young and you weigh 200 pounds, you're a bigger guy. But if you're 50 years old and you weigh 200 pounds, you're a big guy. But there's a lot of guys that weigh 230, 240, 250 that get boards from me, and I would the Yeti is proportioned, so it's got a bit more area up front than the Blackbird. If I made two of them that were 8 feet long, 22 and a half inches wide, the Blackbird would appear more streamlined. The Yeti would. It's not a full nose like the Zeppelin, but it's a wider nose. Just shoot me an email, rusty@rustysurfboards.com, and try to give me a little bit of information about yourself. This is something a lot of people don't do when they order custom boards, is they just go, I want a 6'4" Hustler. And I have a questionnaire. It's about 8 or 10 questions, which helps me really determine. It's hard to say what your ability is, without actually seeing footage of you ride or watching you ride. But I can get a rough idea, and by the size, somebody wants to get a 6'0" Shiv, and I ask them these questions. I have them, they're the same questions for everybody, but it turns out he was coming off a 9-foot wave storm, and that'll be another maybe next week. We're dropping much more than 6 inches at a time. I believe it's a mistake because surfing's hard. I mean, for natural athletes, for guys that get to surf every day, sure, they can become quite good in a matter of a couple, 3 years. Back to your original question, Yeti or Blackbird. Yeah, I have. If you go on our custom site, there's a little box by the you can punch in whatever length you want of that model, and it'll give you stock dimensions. but there's also a little box to the right there that says profile. Click on that. And if you answer those 10 questions, that will really help me design you I think the best board I can for you. Right.
What was the best small wave board for a Quiver?
Do you sell blanks? Yeah, I do to good friends and stuff, but no, we're not in the blank retail business. Best small wave board for the Quiver, I think I've touched on that. When is the Zeke model coming out? The Zeke model, not sure if we're going to call it the Zeke, or we've been toying with the idea of calling it the Miso. I'm sure there's probably 5 Misos out there already in the world from different makers, but I don't know why Miso came to me. But it's a shorter, wider, not quite fishy board. It's Zeke's kind of a smaller stature surfer, but it'll probably maybe top out at 6'2". I don't know. I can make an 8-foot Zeke, or a Miso. But what Zeke's currently riding is like 5'4", 5'6". A fairly curvy outline, but still full. The nose is about 14 and a half, and the tail's about 15 and a half. And it's a swallow wing. And so we have the 419. And I've been working on the 419 Go, which is a little bit less width up front and a touch more rocker than the 419, which is kind of an update of a classic fish. We have the Hatchet, which is 13 and a half inch, 14 inch nose, and the Zeke Miso model is like 14 and a half, 14 and 3/4 inch nose. So it's, back in the day, Clyde Beatty used to make rocket fish, or I forget what, rocket fish or something. And it wasn't as narrow as a twin fin, nose and tail and proportions, but it nonetheless was still a fish. So Zeke's board is kind of a high performance fish, grab rails, pretty solid medium deep concave.
What's your current turnaround time?
That's a good question too. Current turnaround time, we posted on the website, and after you give us your final approval on the design, which is important because I have some people that I kind of, after about the third or fourth time of them changing it a couple of tenths of a liter, or usually it's a liter issue. But after your final approval of the board, I think it's PU polyester is like 3 to 4 weeks. EPS and E-poly 5 to 6 weeks, I think. And the torsion spring is a little bit longer, simply because it's just much more difficult to make. And we have several epoxy laminators, and one of them really knows how to do it. And he also works for somebody else too, so he's available a couple of days a week. So the torsion springs are usually at least 6 weeks. I mean, we could rush them out, but the COVID thing has affected us too. We've had some of our regular workers not coming in as much, and we've since at the beginning of the COVID thing, it was pretty quiet for a month or two. But then the orders started to pick up, and we're actually pretty busy right now. So I think the language on the turnaround time is after your approval, approximate time. So you got to have a little bit of flexibility. We can always do a rush if you want to pay extra. And I think at least for a busier board builder, 3 to 4 weeks on a PU is pretty good. So.
Do you think a 7'6" is too small for an intermediate beginner, 6 foot, 190 pounds? 7'6".
Well, do I think a 7'6" is too small for a 190-pound,
6 foot guy,
6 foot tall beginner plus? No, as long as you pick a model that's got area, like a Moby fish, like the egg, the new egg that we're doing. It's a small E, 2 big G's. How do I name boards? I don't know. It's weird usually. But yeah, if you go on a website and you look at the wider boards, and usually with the extra width comes a little bit of extra thickness. And I'm not saying just wide in the middle, but proportionally fuller nose and tail. Moby fish, the egg, the Zeppelin is a pretty wide tail. The nose is fairly wide, or a mini tanker. If you're just a real cruiser, a mini tanker. But if you're just in the beginning stages, a stock mini tanker might be 22 and a quarter. Consider getting it 22 and a half, or even 22 and 3/4, and 3 1/8 or 3 1/4 thick. So yeah, it's if you're a beginner, do yourself a favor and don't try and look cool by having a small, narrow, high-performance shortboard under your arm. If you have a board with a little bit more length, a little bit more area, not just volume. Just fucking forget the volume, unless you're a pretty good surfer. But the extra area, especially the nose and tail, gives you stability, and the extra thickness gives you more flotation. And so yeah, if you're a beginning surfer, don't challenge yourself too much. I think for most people, the object of surfing is to relax and have fun. And how do you have fun? If you go out and you only catch 2 waves in an hour, that's a lot of sitting. If you catch 10 or 15 waves, and that means every 5 minutes you're up and riding. That's fun. So consider that.
Jake Bushell wants to know where you're from.
What?
Where are you from?
Where am I from? I'm from Mars.
What is the equivalent of MR twin?
Well, I mean, MR was the master of the twin. I think Lost makes boards for Mark under license, but Sean and Mark were like 2 of the last guys to get off of twin fins, and so I honestly think my twin fins reminiscent of Sean are pretty close to the Lost MRs. So you look at the proportions and the template and the wing placement, and how much your board comes back, and it comes through that sweet zone. It's what I call like a third of the way up, maybe a little bit farther back, and it comes into a wing, and then how much you break that line after the wing. If you have the wing and the line continues without any real break, it's just a step down in width, you'll get some advantage out of having the wing. If you have it broken too much, it's kind of hard to set your rail and kind of hard to figure out where to put your back foot. But if you have I made a couple boards, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago for a couple of pretty good surfers, and I was into moving the wing up and having a bigger break, and they hated them. they hated them. But Yeah, you need a slight break. I think once again the wing should be 8.5 to maybe 9.5 inches, depending on the length of the board up, and the average width on the swallowtail is, 6, maybe not less than 6, but 6.5 inches. In a tail that's in the high 14s. We're almost out of time. I was doing a little bit of research on epoxy last night, and I had heard, every once in a while I get to talk story with Carl Ekstrom, but I had heard he mentioned that there were some San Diego lifeguards that in the 50s started glassing the polyurethane blanks with epoxy. I think the epoxy, I could be wrong, I have to maybe reread it, but epoxy was invented and patented in like 1938, and in 1951, Don Oakey, who's a La Jolla Winnincy guy. I mean, back in the day, you had all the big name spots. That's basically where people surfed for the most part. Winnincy, Trestles, Steamer Lane, and Malibu, and but Don was a Winnincy guy and a board builder, and so yeah, in 1951, he was one of the first guys. Like I said, there's never truly a first guy. There's always somebody somewhere that did it before you. But yeah, Don Oakey, he built an epoxy board in 51, and then people have experimented with them from time to time. Josh Bradbury, Josh, or his father, he was a Santa Barbara guy. He started to make epoxy boards in the mid 80s, I think, and that's I had some team riders going to the Allentown, Pennsylvania wave pool contest. It was in 1985, but one of my riders back then was Rob Bain, and built him an EPS carbon board. And back then, it was hard to find good EPS. It was very lightly fused, and the epoxy resins were kind of all over the place. They tended to turn yellow, and Greg Lohr, who was on the GNS surf team back in the early 70s, when I was kind of on the team and I shaped for him, we met, and he's been into epoxy, I think, prior to John Bradbury in Santa Barbara. And then it goes, I think when Clark Foam closed in 2005, it forced all of us to reevaluate how we made boards, because for a while there really wasn't any polyurethane foam available. So I got it was a fax that we got from Clark Foam on, I think it was December 16th or something, 2005, saying he had shut his doors. No warning. But he did have some inventory to sell off, but it just put it in our needs. So I called Greg Lohr, and I said, Greg, help. And so like I said, I'm not the first, but I embraced epoxy right away. And I think it's, like I've said before, I think it's the future. I think eventually polyester resin will be phased out because it's a bit more toxic. 7:59. Gosh, it's gone by pretty fast. Hope you all got something out of my hour of spewing, and have a good week, and maybe we'll catch up next week. Everybody have a great week. Take care.